Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be breaking down Chizuru alongside all the mechanics, new features, additions, effects that she has access to. As a bit of a side note, at the time of this recording, they didn't officially give specifically just English and the Korean side the epiphanies. For whatever reason, JP was able to playtest and go around and test the character, which is, I guess, a decision. But with this, we'll break down some of the mechanics, some of the things that they talked about, and my thoughts on it. But without further ado, let's break it down. So to start things off, there are a couple of new mechanics that are being introduced here. This includes things like the cursed shackles. This also includes things like bind. And as you can see here, the idea here is that you can apply a new unique debuff, which is cursed shackles. This allows you to gain additional resources. When you obtain the resource, you then gain a bind card, and every bind card you get then stacks into a single card. You do more damage with it. Makes sense. Now, despite her being a psionic character, she is actually a DPS from what we understand, which is interesting. But as usual, this is a roguelike game with a lot of different builds for characters, so we'll see, and I'm kind of hopeful that maybe there'll be another build. However, from what we're seeing right now, this is going to be more of a single target DPS. However, in addition to this, as you're seeing here, there are a couple different ways to play her, or there's a lot of different ways for her to scale. Most notably, though, I apologize, is through one of the abilities or one of the cards that we'll explain here down on the bottom right. But as you probably expected, this is a slideshow because, well, that's all they gave us from the live stream. As you're reading here, though, it reads that you can obtain the exclusive resource and a Shadow of the Moon card, Shadow of the Moon being one of the probably the highest DPS card in her kit. With this, however, you can attack a target under the Cursed Shackles debuff, and this is how you get Shadow of the Moon. Using a single card to attack multiple times, though, will make it easier to earn the resource, which is huge, big, and honestly just nice in terms of how she'll scale as a DPS. Now, for point 2, as it says, or as you're seeing, by using the Bounded Dust card, you can also reduce the card costs, and this eases the burden of your AP usage. Now, this will be really important later because for whatever reason, they decided to make one of the 2 initiation cards, which is also interesting, but 2 initiation cards, or with one of them being a AP bind or an AP restriction, which is not necessarily something that we've seen thus far. With this, there are a few card effects we need to go over. So bind, when you have bind, when you have bind cards of the unit are in the hand, you stack it into 1 card, and if bind is 3 or higher, you change this into a Shadow of the Moon card. This is pretty normal, all things considered. This stacks up to 5, and obviously when you use the card, it resets. Pretty nice for stacking overall, but next, we have to talk about Inhibit. This is an effect that is on some of the cards, more specifically one of the initiation cards, as earlier mentioned, and you are unable to gain AP at the start of the turn or on Ravage when you have or play this card. Now, or rather have this effect. In addition to this, though, this will add 1 hit to Shadow of the Moon, which is cool. You would imagine is kind of like the value of this, and as we'll talk about in terms of teams later, there is some value here, but again, it is a little weird, especially with how strong characters like Mika are and how often you're able to get epiphanies or maybe AP related increases to your cards. Cursed Shackles, as we talked about later, when you use an attack card other than a bind card on a target with Cursed Shackles, you gain a Will-O-Wisp, and then obviously the Will-O-Wisp, as you see on the bottom, 5 of the Will-O-Wisps will create 1 Shadow of the Moon. Great. This kind of makes sense. It's a cycle. You build more of this 1 card, you unload the 1 card to deal damage. Now, these were the actual cards that we saw on stream. The typical, you have a 2 times hit or a multi-hit basic attack. Having multiple hits or having multi-hits in general is really nice if you're trying to play alongside morale scalers, or if you have characters that obviously scale off of, well, pretty much anything relating to multi-hits. This obviously also allows you to pair with certain characters. Characters like Ray and such are not only recommended alongside these characters, though, they're also on the banner, which I think is huge. But as we move along, you can see some of the more common, but obviously going to be thrown away cards. This includes the Shield. This doesn't include, however, Karmic Flames, which I think is pretty cool. This will add a Cursed Shackle, which again, we'll get into a little bit later, and we'll break down some of my thoughts about the epiphanies, but this is yet another initiation card, which I think is interesting. It does a little bit of damage, it applies Shackle, and once you have Cursed Shackles, it'll also add a hit. Great. Tsukiyomi is another or a 0-cost skill, and 2 Will-O-Wisps are created for each hit of the next attack card that the unit uses. Great at base, doesn't really matter though because we're probably going to change it with an Epiphany. Bound at Dusk is the other initiation card that is what prevents you from having the AP. It gives you inhibit, and for this you're able to decrease the cost by one until, or decrease the cost of one card by one of another combatant that's used. I apologize, the wording and going through all the translations at this point, but in any case, the idea here is that you reduce cost you reduce the cost in this case, and of course you're obviously able to get this at the start of turn, which is interesting, but it is a unique card, which means that you can't replicate this. Don't know if you would really ever use this, and we'll go over actually how some people are actually thinking or maybe theorizing already about this card. But next we have Oni Hunt, which I think is pretty interesting. It does deal multi-hits, as we've kind of alluded to is the theme of this character. You have multiple damage amounts, and honestly this also has haste, which I think is pretty noteworthy. However, again, with multi-hit cards, though the base of this is only 3, as a bit of a spoiler, there are epiphanies that increase this. And with Shadow of the Moon, of course, this is a card that has retain, it has bind, it deals damage, scaling with the amount of bind stacks, which is obviously how you're supposed to scale it. But interesting as well, there's a bind, or rather a Shadow of the Moon plus, which is also interesting. This also has a heal. It does reduce, or rather I should say, this does also have a multi-hit attached to the plus version, but let's actually move to her ego skill, as I think this is also a very interesting ultimate ego type ability. Now, this is a card where it scales, as far as I understand, through the entire battle, and it reads: for each of the Shadow of the Moons created, you increase 50% max damage on the ego skill itself, up to a maximum of 10. And though 750% does sound kind of goofy and interesting for a single target attack, this is a single target ability, so whether or not this is going to be super relevant, especially with the showcase they've shown us, which is just Chizuru throwing, or rather Tressa throwing a bunch of knives, and then Chizuru being able to pair off of that. Not entirely sure how often you'll be able to use a 5-cost ego skill, when again some of these characters would maybe prefer card draw, maybe prefer using things like Douglas. Whatever the case is, that's fine. Next we have the Manifest Egos. Of course, this is maybe not necessarily something that everyone pays attention to, but with the introduction of a free constellation or extra copy added into the shop, this might be something that you're interested in. Her Manifest Egos are actually quite good. Now, I say good, but that's mostly because the baseline for other manifestations are so low for some of the other characters that it feels like almost laughable. That said, these Manifest Egos feel much more impactful or synergistic to each other, as you could read for like the skill 2, or rather for the Manifest Ego level 2. When you use Shadow of the Moon, it creates, or rather you use the plus version of the Shadow of the Moon, it gives you a base version of the Shadow of the Moon card. And then with the 4th level, this gives you a Lunar Shard if you make a Shadow of the Moon, and this will increase the damage of your Lunar Shard, or rather Lunar Shard increases the damage of your Shadow of the Moon. Then for level 6, this will increase the the damage increase effect of Lunar Shard, and then once you get 3 stacks of Lunar Shard, you increase the number of hits of your. It's just way more synergistic, where just by comparison, most recent history, you have Yuki's S1, which is just remove the damage effect off of a card, which is okay, man, like whatever. And in any case, still pretty decent. Of course, I think overall you're probably going to be looking for something either like the level 2 or level 4, but if you love Chizuru, you're likely going to be picking up level 6 through however many events it takes in order to get these extra copies. Now, this is her limited partner. Well, I say limited, but it's just the rate up partner that you'll see once she's on banner. This is Itsuku. This card is very obviously designed for her. I think this is actually also one of the better partners for a release limited, though of course we'll have to wait and see if this can really beat out some of the more OP, even some of the 3 costs, or rather the lower cost characters, as we've mentioned, even with the character like Douglas. The passive, though, it increases the attack of the combatant by 8 to 16%. In addition to this, every time the assigned combatant card stacks, you get 5 to 10% attack card damage, max of 3 stacks, which is relevant and interesting, but you know, in reality, this is not a very common unique effect, or a common effect at all, this whole combatants card stack. If I'm not mistaken, I think Chizuru is one of the only characters that can actually do this. Now, in addition to this, every time one of the attack card types is used by the assigned combatant, or every time one attack card type used by the combatant deals 3 hits, this should be 30 times 60, I believe, or I think it's 30 to 6, or rather 30 to 60 fixed damage to the target. Scaling, of course, likely with how many copies of this you have. That's okay. It's a decent amount of damage. Nothing super crazy. I think you'd probably just prefer having the passive as a whole, and this is just extra. But next we have the actual ego skill, which is 4 cost. Interestingly enough, this is an AoE attack though, and it applies fierce winds. Now this increases 50%, or increases 50 or adds 50% damage amount to attack cards of the assigned combatant for 1 turn. And honestly, depending on how this, I guess, like depending on what exactly you're fighting, if you're trying to find like a 1-turn kill sort of deck, or depending on what sort of situation you're in, the AoE, not the worst thing in the world. Honestly, 200 is not crazy high, but it is also helpful. In addition to this though, having fierce winds can be helpful, though again, depending on what sort of character or what sort of team Itsuku ends up getting used in, it does feel a little bit odd, or it's a little bit weird to have or prioritize some of these partners, as again, there are other cards or other partners that will just give you card draw. They'll give you some sort of like shuffle to your deck, which is also pretty relevant. And at the end of the day, damage, believe it or not, especially with multi-hit characters, is not necessarily the end-all be-all, excuse me, especially compared to utility. Next, we have my interpretation, or my findings, or my original findings, or ChatGPT translations for what we saw, because again, we only had this in Japanese. But we are going to actually pivot to this because, oh, it is a little bit weird. But as you can see, we can zoom in a little bit and we can actually take a look at some of these cards, hopefully, and all their goodness. Okay, so the first card we have to talk about is the Hellfire card. Again, bit of a translation error, but again, there are a couple different interesting you know, effects here. First and foremost, opening, obviously meaning initiation. This is one of the cards that you get obviously at the very start of your, or I guess at the start of battle. I would imagine Vanish, by the way, is the exhaust, in case you're looking at some of these. I think standout for me, I think Generate Moonshadow card, even despite the 2 cost, is pretty interesting. Again, I think some of these other effects, increasing damage, relevant, reduces the cost of the next card used by 1, also relevant, adds 1 hit count, also pretty good. Now, of course, we are at the mercy of ChatGPT here, likely, and it's really difficult to say right now exactly what some of these effects are talking about, but from what I at least understand, there are obvious, clear, or I guess pretty pronounced like strengths and weaknesses to some of these cards. This Hellfire card actually, or obviously, costs 2, but worth noting here is, of course, at least if you're using this card first, you aren't able to actually generate or increase your AP if before this card you use Twilight Bond. And again, we'll go into why I think some players are hypothesizing throwing, or maybe not even using Twilight Bond, or again being forced, I guess, basically to use characters like Chizuru in place of it, or wait for an epiphany that reduces the cost of the card. But again, fishing for a reduced cost epiphany is not necessarily the most realistic thing, as what you get from an epiphany is kind of just what you get. Now, that said, I do think that the reduced costs kind of makes sense in general. Again, for a deck, or for a, I guess, build where you aren't really able to use multiple or use or generate AP at all, reduced cost cards are going to be quite nice. I should say, in addition to this though, like at the end of the day, adding additional hits is always nice in terms of damage. This is also a multi-hit character. This kind of just plays into the morale stacking, or any sort of multi-hit benefiting strategy, which is why I also think there may be people that end up using something like her first epiphany, if this is in correct order even. However, as we move to the bond, or whatever you want to call it, this bind, of course there are some restraints, or some well, for lack of a better word, there are some limitations to this card. Obviously, this is kind of cool. Again, as a concept, it's like the first or it's the more recent, or it's a more recent example of a like a negative but technically positive card too, or a double-edged sword type card. Some of the more of, like, I guess, pronounced effects: reducing the cost again by random cards by 1 until they're used. Okay, kind of interesting as a concept. You know, when you have or you use the Moonshadow Plus card, you reduce the cost of the next card by 1. Some of these, again, for being 1 cost, are maybe not the most insane thing ever. Again, even using something like the middle one, where it allows you to use 2 random cards, there's like an element of, is this really worth like my 1 or my 1 AP, and then I kind of play the lotto. Even for this as well, activating 2 random lead cards, reducing the cost of the card with the highest cost by 2. All of this in exchange for having no access to AP just feels a little odd. Again, I could definitely see how some of these cards, including the reduced cost cards, would make more sense. But at the end of the day, you know, sometimes, especially if you have characters like Mika or card draw, or you have a bunch of epiphanies, you aren't just going from like 3 AP to 4 or to like 5. Like some decks and some hands, if you keep cycling, you can end up with, you know, anything between like 5, 6, 7, or even like 8 AP on certain turns, which is crazy, honestly. That said, we also have Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi, of course, is also a card that's based on the hit count of the, or rather, let me clarify. There are a couple different ways that the Tsukiyomi skill can work. The first one is that based on the hit count of the next attack card, you gain Demon Fire. Demon Fire, I'm assuming, is the Will-O-Wisp that they're referring to, or the like the amount, or rather the thing that you need in order to generate another Moon or Moonshadow card, from what I understand. In addition to this, you also have a add 1 hit count to the next attack card used, and you gain Demon Fire 1 depending on the hit count. Okay. Again, both of these already seem pretty solid. In general, the Tsukiyomi card seems pretty nice just because, again, it's a 0 cost, it's a freebie, it's a throwaway. It's kind of how you start or set up your damage generators, from what I understand. The third Tsukiyomi, adding 2 hit count to the next Moonshadow or Moonshadow Plus, also pretty nice, especially as a 0 cost buff card. But in addition to this, having something like 3 of the Demon Fire, again, I'm assuming this is like the second generator, or the Wisp, being able to, or gaining 3 Demon Fires based on the number of attack cards, also pretty interesting. Finally though, having a, or even despite this 1 AP cost, having a unique or guaranteed lead card, or rather a unique and a lead card, and making it so that anytime you use an attack card, you get 2 of the Demon Fires. All of these, like, really basically seem very interesting, or very different, or different enough, I should say, where it does seem worthwhile to pick up pretty much any of them. I don't think, like as opposed to the bind card, this doesn't seem like one that you'd throw away. It may be something where it kind of just comes down to whichever ends up being more relevant for your deck. If you have multi-hit where you're able to do more damage, or if you're looking for higher raw damage multipliers, also accessible. But then we have the Oni Hunter, which is okay, interesting enough, I would say. For Oni Hunter, this is again a multi-hit. Overall, I don't think this is a super like a super cut and dry, this is better than the other. Again, there are different effects to these cards. The first one, again, you reduce the damage a little bit, but you obviously get more hits. In addition to this, the effect attached to both of these, despite the added or subtraction or difference in hits and multiplier, are different as well. The first one, despite giving you 4, it also reads that it increases the damage of the next bond card by 40%. Already an interesting setup card, despite already doing a decent amount of damage. However, in addition to this, for the Oni Hunter of the third card, if there are no other attack cards in hand, you add 2 hit counts. So again, these aren't just like necessarily a scale off of multiplier. These are a complete reimagination of the setup for either of these. In addition to this, again, even if you just want a raw multiplier, as you can see here, you also have something where it's an increased damage of the next bond card by 60%, and rather than having multi-hits, you have a flat multiplier. Don't think this is going to be something that most people end up using, though again, we'll have to wait and see how the multiplier plays out. Finally, we also have the fourth Oni Hunter here, which is that it provides, or it generates 2 True Moon. Again, I'm not entirely sure about this. Maybe I have to reread and go through to see if this is like something that I'm missing. As far as I understand, I haven't seen any like direct explanation for what this effect that I'm missing is. Maybe it means it's referring to the cursed shackles, or maybe I'm missing some sort of explanation for what the bind or what the stack or what exactly they're talking about is. In any case though, having several different ways to generate or true moon cards in general is always nice. They do, or rather for the fourth card specifically, this rather than being attack, it gives you 2 of the moon cards. However, these cards have exhaust, which I'm assuming is what they're referring to. The cost gets reduced though, which is also pretty relevant, all things considered. But similar to how there are certain builds, especially with characters like Renoa, where you may find it better to run something like an exhaust if you're trying to throw away all your cards, but you need to kind of finish the fight sooner. This is what I imagine also to be kind of like a 1-turn kill sort of deck, or a 1-turn kill sort of hand, where you generate or you create these cards. If the fight is over in one go, then great, perfect. It's kind of a way to declutter. But otherwise, I think if you want more stable generation, having some of these others is probably more realistic. I'm sure if you guys are also familiar with a character like Yuki, having one of her cards where you're able to forcibly generate an inspired card, as opposed to just turning all the cards in your hand into their inspiration effect version, is also, again, a reasonable choice. Though, again, in most cases, I think most people appreciate the consistency or the stability in being able to draw a card, which may actually end up feeling better than, again, just praying that you landed on 4 cards without any inspiration whatsoever. The final one is an Enhance, which is interesting because it does take the Oni Hunter out of your hand. However, again, Moonshadow Plus gains a 40% damage increase, and at the start of turn, you gain Demon Fire 3. Again, pretty interesting. Overall, again, this isn't exactly what was, again, I maybe I'm like missing something or a concept. I'm assuming this is Will-O-Wisp, again, like what they're referring to. Otherwise, if it's something different, I apologize. But again, generation of any kind in this case, I think is fine. From what we understand though, I think Chizuru looks pretty interesting or pretty good. I think her major downfall, or maybe one of the major concerns for her, is that, again, she seems to have somewhat expensive cards, all things considered. It would appear as though she would want to use or be paired along someone who would maybe want to be able to spam lots of AP or lots of cards. The chances that you have a perfect deck where you have everything be 0 cost is not impossible, but it does require a bit of setup. As a result, if this ends up being something like that, fine, great, amazing. The reality though, I think, is that a lot of people, especially if you're going through content like the Chaos Zero or the Zero System or any of these events as of late, you do probably want someone that can generate AP or can, you know, get you out of a bad spot. Specifically that comes out, or a character that specifically comes to mind as well, a character like Mika, of course, is obviously stunted and removed, or a bit weaker in this case. That said, you don't necessarily have to use Mika, especially if you're planning on a more aggressive you know, or aggressive 1-turn kill sort of playstyle. But again, AP is so nice in this game because there are times where, like, though you may end up using something like Source of Water for healing, it is also obviously usable for something like the AP cost itself, and it allows you to one-shot anything. In any case, these were my initial thoughts about Chizuru. I think she's got an interesting kit. I think her animation looks absolutely crazy, by the way. But ultimately, I was not honestly expecting a DPS character. Apologies again for some of the misunderstandings. This was a very, very weird and wacky live stream and explanation, and the translations, of course, this is like half ChatGPT or something like that. I apologize if I got anything wrong. I'll update it in the comment section, but I'm sure you guys will help me out with that too if I miss anything. Anyways, thanks again for watching though, guys. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good luck with your Chizuru pulls.